I went from reading that book to 6 months later, reading the first paper connecting the microbiome to Parkinson's, to 6 months later, founding a company called the BioCollective. And basically, over the next 10 years, taking all the money I made in my commercial real estate career to start a company to understand the microbiome and then eventually build these products to try to help John and other people like John.
This is the Angel Next Door podcast, where we will talk about all things angel investing. What it is, who does it, how do we find them, what does it mean to invest in an early stage company? If you have ever wondered how you can affect the change you want to see in the world, then tune in to learn more. In this episode, I'm talking to my friend and citizen scientist, Martha Carlin, founder of BiotiQuest. Martha and I met several years ago after my mom was diagnosed with ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. Martha shares her remarkable transformation from accountant to biotech entrepreneur after her husband's unexpected Parkinson's diagnosis fueled her determination to seek solutions where none seemed available. ALS and Parkinson's are both neurodegenerative diseases. She explains the science and the story behind her revolutionary probiotic products, the hurdles she faces as a small business owner in the digital age, and her unwavering resolve to take action in the face of adversity. Plus, she'll give us a sneak peek into exciting new products on the horizon, including a mood-boosting formula for today's stressful world. Enjoy the show. Martha, thank you for coming on to the Angel Next Door podcast. I'm so happy to see you again.
It's great to be back with you, Marcia.
So I am excited for the listeners to hear an update on your story and a little bit more about the amazing products that you put out through BiotiQuest, which we'll talk all about because I am truly one of your biggest fans and customers. So why don't you start out, just tell us a little bit about your backstory.
I'm not a scientist by training. Actually, my background, it was my undergraduate degrees in accounting, and I came out of school and was trained at Arthur Andersen as an auditor. Never take anything at face value. Examine the evidence for yourself, which is great advice for anyone. And they trained me in something called transaction flow review, which is how you map out a business and what's flowing through it to look for business risk. And in 2002, my 44-year-old husband, John, was diagnosed with Parkinson's, and he was a, quote, healthy, marathon running, young, never really done anything bad. And how did he have an old person's disease? And so I looked at it and I was like, this is a systems problem, which kind of went back to that transaction flow review. And so I started just mapping out the system, which started with food and studying our food supply and the many things in the food supply that are now in the news. Back in 2002, they weren't in the news, and changed our whole diet. And John's tremor disappeared and he was fairly stable for a long time. But in 2014, I read a book called Missing Microbes by Dr. Martin Blaser, and it was talking about this thing called the microbiome that I had never heard of, and that's the trillions of bacteria, fungi, and viruses that live in and on our body and function as our internal pharmacy to maintain our health. And when things are in balance, they do a great job of that, and when things are out of balance, they can cause all kinds of problems. And I went from reading that book to 6 months later, reading the first paper connecting the microbiome to Parkinson's, to 6 months later, founding a company called the BioCollective. And basically, over the next 10 years, taking all the money I made in my commercial real estate career to start a company to understand the microbiome and then eventually build these products to try to help John and other people like John. And sadly, John got COVID at the end of 2021 after he had been really stable for a long period of time. And after having COVID, he never really fully recovered from that. And he had a pulmonary embolism in September and passed away.
Yeah, so sad. And he lived such an amazing life during that time. I remember talking to you and you talking about how the two of you would go hiking. And I thought, wow, he was diagnosed over a decade ago, even more than that. And he's doing all these incredible things. Kudos to you for figuring a lot of this out early on and having him attacking it from the beginning.
Right. Well, we climbed Mount Kilimanjaro. We ice climbed. He climbed Half Dome not that long ago. He climbed Half Dome and Mount Whitney and just did a lot of great, exciting things that most people, once they're diagnosed with Parkinson's, would never think of doing.
Right. Yeah. All right. So you start the BioCollective. You looked at a ton of samples from both Parkinson's patients and stool samples from both Parkinson's patients and from, I guess, what they would call healthy individuals. Although I don't know how much you can really define that as healthy, but how about non-Parkinson's individuals? and really started studying the difference and finding some interesting similarities in the Parkinson's patients, right?
Yes, and from that first paper that was published on Parkinson's, there have literally been thousands of papers, and all of those pieces are starting to come together into a picture of what's going on in the battle in the gut between gram-negative and gram-positive bacteria and how that is potentially implicated in Parkinson's. And I have a paper that will be coming out on that hopefully later this year, not too much later, but all those pieces are coming together in terms of not just Parkinson's, because I think it ties to a lot of these other chronic diseases as well.
So then you had the idea that maybe there was something you could make or create in order to affect this, and hence the probiotic came about. But explain to our listeners, I know a little bit about it, but I could never explain it like you can, the difference in the probiotics that you would find at like a grocery store versus yours, because yours is so super special.
The probiotics industry has been around for a long time. And there's a kind of a standard set of bacteria that are commercially available, and they're commercially available from 3 large suppliers. So when you go to the grocery store and that shelf full of probiotics, 99% of those are going to be just from the same 12 strains, roughly, from those same suppliers. And they're not particularly targeted, I will say, for a specific purpose. And our idea actually came from, I attended a Parkinson's conference where researchers were showing that the sugar alcohol mannitol could stop the aggregation of the proteins that are a hallmark in Parkinson's. And this was in an animal model. They showed it could also help clear them out of the brain. And I came back and bought this little mannitol chemistry book and was looking at the first chapter, and it was talking about how there's a handful of bacteria that can convert glucose and fructose into mannitol. And humans don't use we don't use mannitol, so we just pee it out or it comes out in our stool. And so as I started looking at that, I had a friend who had spent 20 years in the probiotics industry, and he was a fermentation chemist. And I was like, could we like put back the factory, basically? So this concept of a working team of microbes as a factory kind of came out of that, reading that paper and seeing those people at the conference. And so we put together this 8-strain formula, and we made a little prototype of it and gave it to John. And at the time that we made the probiotic for him was a kind of a down period for him, and he was walking with a cane and unable to navigate through crowds. And within a month, he was able to put his cane away, and he was able to navigate through crowds again. Later that spring in May, our daughter's graduation of 5,000 people or so, he was able to weave through the crowd, all of that. And we were measuring his microbiome, and we could see that it was moving back closer and closer to a healthy human microbiome profile. And we did that for about 120 days, and it continued to remodel and improve. And so then we just shared it with friends and family, not necessarily Parkinson's people. And we were getting all this feedback, like people who had blood sugar issues were like, this has stopped my sugar craving, and my A1C went down, or different things like that. And we just put it on our website, but we were still focused on collecting stool samples. And so we were selling a little bit of it. But then we ended up building a computational model where we could take basically the genomes of each of the individual strains and put them together to see how they work together as a team. So what does the team cross-feed each other? How do they work together as a little group in a factory to come out the other end with your car? Not everybody in there has the same skill set, and they all work together. And so our computational model, we put in our first formula, which was this sugar shift formula, and it showed that the formula actually did produce more mannitol. It produced butyrate, which feeds the lining of the gut. It lowered antibiotic resistance genes, and it had a number of other actions related to improving energy production and just overall digestion of food. And we took that model and we sat down in a room and said, okay, well, what other problems do we need to solve for people? And we actually mapped out 24 different products, from vitamin production in your gut to, we have one for hot flashes. So we have a bunch that we haven't actually brought to market yet. But when COVID came around, we moved out of the stool sample collection because we felt like that was dangerous, collecting live samples, and pivoted to really start focusing on the probiotics. And so we took the first 5 formulas. So we have one for cardiovascular health, one for the immune system, one for sleep, and one for restoring your gut after antibiotics, plus the one for sugar metabolism. And what makes them different from all those ones on the shelf is that we've used that modeling and the genomes of the actual strains of bacteria that we use to pick a team that actually works together for a period of time to produce those molecules that you need. For example, in the heart product, it's producing CoQ10 and nitric oxide, and those are both beneficial for cardiovascular health. Or for the immune product, it has a specific strain in it that produces what are called bacteriocins that target all the foodborne pathogens like salmonella and listeria and E. coli and things that you would get like if you eat out at salad bars all the time or if you're going to Mexico or out of the country. We always recommend take something like that prophylactically. I've also had people who've gotten food poisoning and then taken the ideal immunity, and within 24 hours, it's like they didn't have it at all.
Amazing. And of course, the sleep one, Simple Slumber, my absolute favorite, produces melatonin, right?
It produces melatonin and tryptophan. And it's interesting because I came back from a conference that I hosted last week and I was so exhausted. And I thought, I'm going to take some Simple Slumber so I make sure that I have a really deep night's sleep. I took 2 of them. I got home on Friday and I slept. It was just such a restful sleep and dreaming, like nice dreams. It was great.
Oh, yes. I'm a huge fan. Okay. So you've created these amazing products that everybody should, and we'll put all the show notes, links and everything in there. But it is really challenging being a small business. So tell us a little bit about the things you've been up against trying to even market or get this incredible product that could be very helpful to many people out in the market.
Well, one of the kind of interesting stories I tell to people is 50 years ago, we had Main Street, we had stores, people went into stores, and we've gradually narrowed that window to now we have what I call digital Main Street. And digital Main Street is controlled by the big giants, Amazon, Google, and Meta. And I guess TikTok would be in there, but we're still haven't been able to get onto TikTok. But this control mechanism, they almost act as a quasi-government entity without you have no due process. I'll start with Amazon as an example. We started out on Amazon. We actually had a third-party company that was selling for us on Amazon. They were the 5th largest reseller on Amazon, and then Amazon went through a strategy of we're getting rid of all the resellers. And so they went through a process of kind of squeezing their margins until most of them went bankrupt. And we fortunately had a little heads up to where we pulled out all of our inventory. So we didn't get stuck with losing our inventory, but we got stuck with losing $50,000 in that process. So then we went back onto Amazon ourselves and the process was going great. Sales were growing 20-25% per month. And we had an order come through where the person, when they received the order, the day they received the order, they posted a review that said it put them in the hospital, which after talking to Amazon, which took us 40 days to actually get to a person, they said competitors will often do this to target you because they know the algorithms will basically block your account. And so it shut down all of our sales for 40 days and we lost a substantial amount of money being off of Amazon. And then we got back onto Amazon after that period. So then you have to go through this kind of slow ramp up process. And 3 months into that, something inside of Amazon changed back all of our materials to some prohibited language that we didn't do. So we have no visibility to who changed our pages or landscape, and they can't tell us. And that put us in a flag again, back with the AI machinery. And it didn't shut off the account. We're scrambling. It's taking our energy away from all the other things that we need to be doing. So it took us about a month to get that resolved. And so we've been back in this sort of ramping up slowly with Amazon, but they basically act as an arbiter of regulatory frameworks that are outside of what the real regulatory frameworks. So they'll say, you can't say this, even though it's allowable by the FDA. I suppose some of that is to mitigate their own business risk. But, they have what I call a mafia business model. Then you have Facebook. We've had a challenge with Facebook because when John passed away, my son posted on the information about John's passing that if anybody was interested in information about his service, they could put their name on this. Basically, he set up a Google form to capture their emails, and Facebook flagged him as a phishing person and shut his access to the account down completely, which also shut down his access to our advertising account. And for 8 months, he's been in this loop with Facebook, unable to basically do anything with the I can still access the account, but he runs most of that stuff and he's unable to access the account. And it's one of those things where there's no due process. It's very difficult to get to a human. Same thing with Amazon. There is a tier you can pay for, but we're on a waiting list to actually pay for superior customer service where you can actually talk to a person. And it's just like these AI loops of bots that they use that have the algorithm that decides whether you're an acceptable person or an acceptable business or not. And then over on Google, they just randomly classified one of our products as a pharmaceutical and said we have to meet all the pharmaceutical requirements. We have been unable for 6 months to get anyone to speak to us and resolve that issue because it's obviously not a pharmaceutical. And then they basically kicked us out of the marketplace at the top where you see the pictures because we have a vegetable capsule that they say is prohibited, but almost all the products out there use that same kind of vegetable capsule. And there are literally thousands of products you can click on in there right now that have that vegetable capsule. And we can't get any resolution on that either. So a small company has very little recourse against these big giants that are running the operation by algorithms and very few real people who can take your problem to resolution. And they don't really care about the little guys. And they have these premium tiers. Each one of them have a high level premium tier that provides access. Amazon has, I forget what it's called. They have these premium seats. There are about 250 of them, and it costs $3 million for that seat that gives you access and visibility into the system for much greater reach and ability to get to the customer. And I think it's been a while since I've heard anything about Facebook's, but Facebook has a higher level advertising tier. A lot came out in the news during one of the elections about that there's this ability to see into the system on a much deeper level. As a small business, when there's only one digital main street or three, Google, Meta, and Amazon, that are all controlled by these giant machines of algorithms, I think it's going to continue to be challenging for small businesses as we move into a tighter and tighter control grid. And I don't think people really appreciate, if they haven't been through one of these experiences, how detrimental that control grid is and where we are heading in terms of your personal freedom, your business freedom, and ability to transact. And then we haven't had this issue, but in the very beginning, when I was setting up platforms, we looked at a platform that basically doesn't allow any supplement sales on its platform. You could potentially get to a point where these cloud-based systems decide, you know what, we're not going to let any supplements sell on these platforms anymore, so we're shutting you off, and then you'll have to go scramble around and build your own system.
That's crazy. So you have your website and people can go directly to the website and get the product, right?
Well, people can go directly to the website and get the product. And then we do have an Amazon store and we sell on Amazon, but it's obviously preferable to us if people buy directly from us, because the other thing, when a customer buys on Amazon, we have very little recourse. If a customer is unhappy, it's the transact or the communication with the customer is very much controlled by Amazon. You never get to see their name. There's an extra layer of difficulty in resolving issues with customers, and you don't own the customer or the relationship with the customer. So in some ways, that layer that Amazon has put on top can be very damaging to your brand because you can't interact directly with the customer.
Right. Yeah. I'm just thinking, like, I personally am a subscriber for getting the product every month. And I know that I can reach out at any time, and not to, obviously I could reach out to you, but the process was very easy to say, hey, I have my credit card got changed or what. I mean, that I could go and do myself, but even if your address, whatever happens, it's really the customer service through the website's great.
But I also appreciate that people who are Amazon users, and I have an Amazon Prime account, they like the ease of, I want a product, I can click on it and it's that on Amazon. And so I appreciate that, and we appreciate the ability to be able to sell there. But it's most definitely a double-edged sword for a small business because you don't have that direct customer relationship.
Yeah. So what is the future then of BiotiQuest? What are you going to put out, some of the other strains, or what's going to be?
So we actually have a new product coming out probably in the next, I'm going to say 45 days, called Perfect Peace, which seems like the perfect timing.
Yes.
That we all need some perfect peace in the world of chaos we have at the moment. So this is one that we had designed for basically mood and anxiety, temporary anxiety, or that sort of constant tension that we are living under today that I think probably a lot of people could use. And then our next product after that, we actually have an anti-aging formula, or healthy aging, that we designed based on looking at our stool profiles back when we had the bank and we're doing all of that. We looked at what was happening in the different decade by decade signals of how to restore energy production and the drivers of longevity or aging well.
Amazing.
So that'll probably be maybe by the end of the year, or if not, the first of next year.
Incredible. Well, Martha, thank you for coming on to the podcast today and telling us all these amazing things and how you got started with making these products. And we'll make sure to put the links in the show notes so that everybody can know where to find you.
Well, thanks for having me again. It's always fun to see you.
Thanks for listening. To connect with me, visit my website at marciadawood.com. And please subscribe, follow, and leave a review. It helps the podcast get seen by more people. And remember, you can also find the Angel Next Door podcast on YouTube too. And if you're looking to learn more about investing in the changes you want to see in the world, sign up for Ann and Bill Payne's ACA Angel University classes. Go to the angelcapitalassociation.org, all one word, to find out the schedule. And classes are now available on demand. Many classes are offered, everything from angel investing basics, which include fundamentals, risk, due diligence, term sheets, valuations, returns and portfolio strategy, and even a class on group formation. There's even a deeper dive where you can get advanced classes, including capitalization tables, startup boards, and exit strategies. If you're not already a member of the Angel Capital Association, you can become one for a low price that will give you unparalleled access to discounts, free webinars with a huge archive of content, networking opportunities, and much more. We'd love to have you join us. All content for this website is informational and not intended to serve as legal, tax, accounting, or investing advice. While Marcia, that's me, does serve on the SEC Small Business Capital Formation Advisory Committee, my views are my own and not the views of the SEC or my fellow colleagues on the committee. Our speakers and hosts are thoughtfully selected for their educational value, but their opinions are their own and do not necessarily represent the views of the host, me, or the Angel Capital Association, and neither specifically endorse the use of presenters' products or services. Listeners of the podcast should consult their own tax, investing, legal, or accounting advisors before making important financial decisions. All warranties, including accuracy, completeness, and suitability for specific purpose, are disclaimed.